Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my channel. If you've just dropped by this channel, maybe you're interested. I hope you stick around, I hope you subscribe. Entirely up to you, but thank you if you do. Feel free to share my videos. This one, I want to address something that I think is obvious in this digitalized world, which is that sometimes you're inundated, absolutely inundated with information, with a million different viewpoints. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but if you go to YouTube, and obviously it depends what you've subscribed to. You may only be subscribed to certain channels, but if, like me, you follow current affairs, you'll get all sorts of news sources coming up. You'll get all sorts of interviews. You'll get all sorts of um, people positioning for various, viewpoints. It's absolutely, it's everywhere. So how do we cut through the noise? How do we slow down a little bit? How do we slow down a little bit and say, okay, this is this point of view, this is that point of view, what do I believe in? Now, I'm someone who has quite strong convictions. I have a pretty good idea of what I believe in, but I still find it, frankly, a little bit stressful and at times overwhelming to see this avalanche of data, information, etc. And then, of course, we live in an era where there's a lot of disinformation out there, basic falsehoods being spread around. And then, how do we know what is false, what isn't? And then, who gets to decide that? Who fact checks the fact checkers, so to speak? Um, a lot of people are critical of mainstream media, and I think there's a good basis for that. I don't think they've helped their own case over the years. I have come across as arrogant. By they, I'm talking about BBC, CNN, big networks. Haven't always helped their own case. They have come across as a bit self-righteous at times, and there has been scandals, certainly at the BBC. But I will still say that I trust the BBC more than some alternative sources. I mean, I think that there is a basic integrity there that sometimes is compromised by bias. But I do think that there are some of the best journalists I've ever seen have worked at the BBC. This is not to diminish journalists in other networks, but I'm just using this as an example because in this country it's a particularly prominent one. Um, I mean, let's look at just to take one issue, the war in the Holy Land. BBC has been condemned by both sides. So there's people who say it's too biased towards Israel. There's others who say it's too biased against Israel. Now, if you're the Director General of the BBC, how do you handle that? Do you only listen to one side? And then you get even fiercer criticism from the other. You try to address both. I think with this situation, I mean, I'm referring to this letter that was sent by some Jewish leaders to the BBC complaining about anti-Israel bias, but they should consider that the other side is complaining just as much. I mean, I think it was roughly 4,000 complaints from both sides. It's roughly equal. So I don't envy, I don't envy the Director General, um, because it's a constant balancing act. Now, in terms of cutting through the noise here, I think we live in an era of punditry, and I can't criticize that because I wouldn't mind being a pundit myself. So it would be hypocritical of me to criticize that. Um, I think it has got a place. I do think where people can construct strong arguments. Um, they could get others to think about those issues. But I do wonder if punditry has kind of taken over the news. How often do you see, I suppose if you switch on the BBC News at 6, you'll see just straight reports, right? This is what's happening in the world, this is what the situation is. But so much of news media nowadays is punditry. And again, I'm not criticizing it. I would love to be able to do that. It's quite lucrative and I'm ambitious. Of course, I'd be a hypocrite if someone said to me, Nathan, you take this platform and you pontificate your views. I'm not going to say no. So I'm not going to criticize that in of itself, but I do think that it is important to balance it out with straight news, and particularly with the American media, Fox News, and yes, CNN as well. There's so much punditry, even in the straight reporting, by which I'm talking about this is what's happened in the world today. There's still punditry injected into that. It's almost impossible to escape. Now, some of this may be pushback against independent outlets that have constantly railed against mainstream media. They call it legacy media nowadays. Um, so it's this constant war of attrition between media outlets. I will say this though, I have to laugh when I see the likes of Elon Musk putting up a post as he did yesterday on X with all these little heads, like these little humanoid heads, and every single one of them had like a media source on it, like, oh, don't listen to them, listen to me, listen to Elon Musk instead, because he is an absolute prophet of truth. He'll always tell you the truth, except that he doesn't. And again, like I said in the last video, I wouldn't underestimate the power of Elon Musk. He's the richest person in the world. He has a huge personal following on X. I think it's 200 million. Um, he's one of the most powerful people in the world, without question. And he's not even elected to any office. That's telling in itself. I don't say, I don't say to people, oh, you have to believe mainstream media, because I certainly have my share of skepticism. But I would caution people about going to the likes of Elon Musk for the truth. I really would, because he has a track record of spreading falsehoods. Um, if the BBC done that, they would be called out on it and they'd have to address the official complaints, rightly so. But I think there's a lot of double standards in those who praise Elon Musk, because they let him away with things that others don't get away with. If he spreads a falsehood, oh well, he's made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. But if Keir Starmer were to be caught telling a barefaced lie, you know, people would be furious. They'd say, "How disgraceful! The Prime Minister's lying." It's um, and then we get into the partisan culture wars. A lot of it is partisan. Um, Cutting through the noise is difficult, and for someone like myself, I proudly call myself a centrist, but I'll admit that being in the center is not always easy, because it means that if you're true to your conviction, it means there's times you have to disagree with people you respect, and it also means that you risk the ire of both sides. If I assume a right wing position on be anything, then the left will call me a right winger, and they'll not trust me. If I assume a left wing position because I genuinely believe in it, then the right will not trust me, and they'll say I'm just another snowflake or woke, or I do think those terms are overused, I will say. Um, so I guess the message I want to put out with this video is, in this deeply convoluted world, in this era where there's so much information out there, you have to just slow down a little bit. Okay, I would really, really urge people to be careful about being sucked into a rabbit hole and just believing any contrarian source because it pertains to be against the mainstream. You need to think critically. You need to question every source, to some extent. I'll be honest, there are sources I trust a lot more than others. I don't think it's a level playing field. I mean, if you put a BBC report next to, well, he's kind of out of business now, but say Alex Jones, that's a no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer. I'm not even going to humor Alex Jones because I know what he's all about. Um, but there is grounds for nuance and being open-minded at looking at other sources. You know, on this channel, I remember I made a video where I was saying it is very, very important that establishment, institutions, uh, and that crosses the board. It's the government, it's the police, it's the royal family, it's across the board, the judiciary system. They need to have humility. They need to introspect at where the public is dissatisfied, and they need to address it. I even making that video, there were people who had obviously not bothered to watch the video saying that I was a puppet, I was a sheep, I was part of the mainstream. and absolutely ignoring the fact that I was precisely criticizing those institutions. And why were they doing this? Because I had dared to talk about the far right. I've noticed there's a tendency with the right these days, not the actual far right, but the right, to downplay the far right. So it sort of goes along these lines. I mean, we saw this during the riots. Whenever anyone mentioned far right, whether it's the prime minister or others, then there was this hysterical reaction like, oh, Starmer is calling everyone who's concerned about immigration far right. Actually, he never said anything of the sort. What he was talking about specifically was ultra nationalist, blood and soil type groups who are far right by definition. The likes of Patriotic Alternative, National Action, and so on. They are thugs. They're absolutely racist. There's no question about it. Anyone who looks at the violence this summer and says there was no racist component is deluded. They're absolutely deluded. This wasn't just people who were fed up and they decided to set cars on fire. There was a context to it. Disinformation being spread around by a horrendous crime, and the wrong people being blamed for that. So there was absolutely a racist component to it. Um, I mean, in my city, I didn't actually realize this until today, but um, one of the local clergy here who was involved in the peace rally afterwards here in Sunderland, he mentioned that he'd actually seen rioters trying to get headstones in a graveyard to use as weapons against the police. That is, I hadn't even realised that until today. I could believe it because they've done a lot of other things, but that's horrendous. Anyway, I digress. On this topic about cutting through the noise and having so much information out there, this is also the reason why, sometimes subscribers with good intentions will say, Nathan, have you seen this? Have you watched that? And I respect that. I like to engage with my subscribers. But with the greatest respect, I simply can't get around to everything. I mean, there's any number of subjects going on in the news right now. There's Biden pardoning his son. There's a flare up of violence in recent days in Syria, the re flare up of violence, I should say. There is the situation in Ukraine. There is a million questions around Trump's cabinet. There's so many things going on at once. So, for someone who covers geopolitics, it's impossible to cover everything at once. I would have to be making several videos every single day, and I don't have time for that. Um, I'd rather do that ratio if the channel really grew and there was, you know, that would be ridiculous. I think some days actually I do with just several videos, but anyway, I'll wrap this up. But I think there's a very very important thing here. I think we all need to slow down just a little bit. You know, it's not necessary to be looking at every interesting thing at once. It's not necessary to be opinionating on every interesting thing at once. I'm an opinionated person. I freely admit that. I've got strong views on things. But I know I would be exhausted. I would be exhausted if I were to give this is my take on that, this is my take on this. The politicians are expected to have opinions, they're expected to lay out their positions. I'm sure even politicians, they get home from their day in the Commons, from casting votes, from responding to constituents and so on. And really, they're like anyone else. They'll want to escape with a bit of Netflix or, maybe catch up on some paperwork or something. But I'm sure even politicians, even political people, need a bit of escapism. Everyone does. Think um, I think it's not healthy to be absolutely fixated on politics. But there are, of course, situations if someone has lost a loved one to a terrible crime that becomes their life, and I understand that, and I have huge respect for that, and I try to support them in a tiny, tiny little way that I can, signing petitions, sharing those petitions, and so on. Um, anyway, I'll wrap this up, but that's the message I want to put out with this. You know, we have over 8 billion people in the world. There's so many different sources out there. There's so many things going on at once. It's very, very important. By all means, if you like myself, take an interest in what's going on in the world, that's good. But it is also important to sometimes just slow down a little bit. We cannot all do everything. No individual can really. You get influential individuals, but most people cannot do everything. We need to give ourselves a break, slow down, try to be a decent person, and also think critically when it comes to information online. Just, if you find a source, try and see if it's backed up by other sources, for example. Um, Things like that. Just people will have strong opinions on things, and that's fine. But it is sometimes important to question yourself, to really, really question, am I wrong about this? I think we can all do with a bit of humility, and I'm including myself, to question our, when we feel so strongly about something, because it does happen in life that people change their opinions on things where they felt strongly about something and they feel less strongly later on. It does happen. So there is something to be said for having a little bit of humility and sometimes saying to yourself, well, am I right about this? Maybe I've got that wrong. Um, and also standing up for a conviction. You can do both actually. Um, I hope this video's given people something to think about. Let's just slow down a little bit. You don't have to opine on everything. I'm talking to myself as much as anyone. Um, Slow down. That's all. Thanks for watching.